Welcome to Conversations That Grow. If you've been listening to Push to Be More podcast, you'll notice things look a little bit different here today. That's because we've rebranded to Conversations That Grow, a podcast where we explore how meaningful conversations open doors, create opportunities, and drive business success. Today's guest, Matt Blair, knows firsthand the power of conversation. In fact, conversations have played a defining role in Matt's life, shaping not just his business, but also his relationships and the way he approaches growth. So meet Matt. He's the COO and one of the founding partners of REI Capital Growth, an investment fund designed to empower small balance investors with direct access to the wealth-generating power of the U.S. commercial real estate. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. In our pre-call, Matt, you mentioned that your business journey really started with a conversation you had with your dad. I'd love for you to take us back to that moment. What sparked that discussion, and how did it eventually lead to the creation of REI Capital Growth?
Yeah. So me and my dad had both spent our entire careers within the commercial real estate market. I was on the debt side, and my dad was more on the equity side, and he was a broker and a property manager, and I was more working with banks. But he created the small family and friends investment accounts, which I was an investor in. And there's certain issues with that strategy where people are distributed income, but maybe they don't necessarily need or want that income today, but they want to reinvest it back into the fund or reinvest it back into the property in order to grow their investments over a longer period of time. And so we were having those conversations, how do we deliver this type of product? Is it even possible? And it was a response to our personal feedback as investors, as well as the feedback from the investors in his friends and family investment vehicles, in order to try to build something that's a little bit different. And through those conversations, and I remember one very specifically, was in 2018. I had just moved to a new apartment in Dallas. I remember this very vividly. My apartment was not furnished yet. It took a long time to furnish my apartment. And so my apartment is totally empty. And it's raining, which was pretty rare because I was living in Dallas and they don't get a ton of rainfall. But it was raining that day. I was looking out the window at the pizza place across the street, and we were having a deep conversation about, how would we structure this? How would this work? What would get people excited about this? And we kind of came to the realization that this isn't a new idea. It's an idea that gets implemented at the highest levels by the ultra high net worth individuals. They build it for themselves, right? They buy properties that they own for really, really long periods of time, generations, and the value of those properties grow over tremendously long periods of time. It's slow, and it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's really a wealth maintenance and a long-term growth strategy. It's also a great way to pass money down to the next generation. So we realized that there's a really strong track record of this long-term value creation investment strategy, and we decided to mimic, ultra-high net worth family offices. And then the real challenge has taken us the past 8 years to how do we deliver that investment strategy to our investors, or to small balance investors that don't have access, that don't have enough capital to go out and build this for themselves. And that's just been a perpetual ongoing conversation over and over years. And now we are qualified with the SEC, so we can accept small balance investors. Any small balance investors across the world can invest directly with us on our website. And we are doing our full-scale launch in the next couple of weeks. We're working out the final tweaks of our investor portal. We're qualified, like I mentioned, with the SEC. So we are just weeks away from our grand opening.
That's amazing. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And And it all stems back from that one conversation back in 2018.
That's great. So when you were sitting there talking to your dad, was it this slow realization that this is what makes sense? This is what we need to do. We need to mimic what the others are doing? Or was it one of those sudden idea that came out of, like, you're having these conversations and this idea just dropped? What was that like?
So commercial real estate is a very old industry, right? And there's a status quo, I guess you could say, within commercial real estate, and that everybody does it kind of the same way. And there is a tremendous amount of pushback when you do something new or different because it's such an entrenched industry. So there's a big question, well, why hasn't anybody else done this before? And that question was a huge hurdle for us to get over, because if no one's ever done this, there has to be a reason why no one has ever done this before. And so having that big realization that, wait a minute, tons of people have done this before and they are continuing to do it. They're just doing it for themselves. And so that epiphany was that's why I remember that conversation so vividly, is because it came out of nowhere. Just wait a minute, of course people do this all the time, right? And so that kind of came out of nowhere, I think. I don't know where it came from. It just kind of popped in. But that was the major hurdle that we got over, which is, this is not new. This is actually a very old strategy. The only new part is bringing it to people that haven't had access to it before.
Yeah.
And then also, you can't really deliver this to hundreds or thousands of small balance investors without, everybody having a smartphone and being able to access it directly from their pocket.
Yeah.
So that's pretty new. That's only 10 years old. I mean, maybe 12 or 13 years old now. There's a opportunity that's relatively new within this space, within kind of all commerce, I suppose you could say, that hasn't been fully taken advantage of in this way. And so we think that there's an opportunity to bring all these small balance investors together in order to deliver a better investment product to them, depending on their investment objectives, of course.
Yeah, that's great. I love how that conversation, that moment in time, is just like imprinted in your mind, and you can go back to that. I love that. What were some of the early challenges in turning that idea into a reality?
Well, the getting qualified with the SEC it's a really big hurdle. And the reason is because the SEC and the laws that you have to navigate are designed to protect small balance investors from scams. And if you study any financial history, there are a number of very large, very interesting scams that happened throughout the world that left individual small balance investors, with nothing, totally destroyed. One that's I always think about is the tulip. I forget exactly what it's called, but tulips became remarkably expensive at some point, thousands upon thousands of dollars for a tulip. And in that time's money, right? The equivalent. And so people were buying tulips as a store of value, but tulips die, they wilt, right? There's no long-term tangible value there. So then people were selling tulips for thousands upon thousands of dollars, and they were trying to retrade them and resell them. And obviously, eventually, the music stops and somebody's left without a chair. And it's usually the people that get in last, right? And those are usually the smallest balance investors. The SEC is doing what they should be doing in trying to protect small balance investors. And so going through their process to get qualified in order to sell a security to a small balance investor is a very long process. And that wasn't necessarily the goal when we first started out. In real estate, it always makes the most sense to have the fewest number of large investors possible, because it's easier to aggregate 10 people with a large checkbook than it is to aggregate thousands of small balance investors with a smaller check size. So, when we originally started out, we were targeting larger investors, but we realized that number one, they can build this for themselves. They don't really need us to build it. But also, in order to create liquidity for our investors, because investors need their money back at some point, right? In order to create that liquidity vehicle, we need a large number of small balance investors because their investment timelines are all going to be different. And we can talk about exactly how that works and functions, but figuring out how to deliver that liquidity without having to liquidate assets in the fund was a big challenge. And that took a long time for us to figure out and realize that it could work at a larger scale was also a kind of a longer term process.
Yeah. When you say us, was that you and your dad, or was there someone else involved?
Yeah. So it was me and my dad, and then our CFO Greg has been with us from the beginning, and he's an accounting and finance guru, and he's really helped us structure these entities and these funds in such a way that we deliver maximum value to our investors in as tax efficient a way as possible. Because investing in real estate is really all about tax efficiency. And that's what makes it such a great asset class. It's because it gives you the ability to not have to pay taxes today. It lets you pay taxes in the future, which means you can reinvest more of your money today, like a higher percentage of the capital today. So he's been instrumental in getting this off the ground because we needed the appropriate financial structure to deliver a really great product to our investors. Yeah. And so he's been there from the beginning as well.
Oh, that's cool. So it sounds like the whole qualification process is quite stressful and laborious in some ways too. So did you ever want to give up in any of that time? Yes, very much so. I struggled with that quite a bit, but I do have to give it up to my father because he is just completely unrelenting. It's not just that he believes that it's going to work. He knows it's going to work. And he says, you have to know it. You just have to know that it's going to work. And this is another conversation we have all the time because, I have 2 little kids now, and it's hard to be an entrepreneur with a family, right? It's really hard. And I didn't understand that before I had a family. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to succeed. And there are times where things just aren't working. We got rejected by the SEC for the 4th or 5th time. And it's like, how long is this going to take? So I definitely wavered, but, I think in an entrepreneurial endeavor, you have to have somebody that just keeps pushing you.
Yeah, will never give up. And that is absolutely my father. And, he dragged me along, and I'm very happy that he did because I think we're really on the precipice of something really big.
Yeah, sounds like it. Have you ever asked him what that is in him, that that knowing that something's going to work? Where does that come from?
I've never asked him that. But it's something my brothers and I talk about. Just, it's unbelievable how he never gives up. He just never gives up. Regardless of what happens, how bad it gets, he's very optimistic, and he can always make things right in the long term. And maybe, he was in the military, so maybe that comes from his military experience. But, I never asked him. Which is funny. I should do that.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Like, what is it that pushes them to, or that knowing, and then also the push to just be persistent and persevere regardless of what's going on? Yeah,
absolutely. And my brother is also in the midst of an entrepreneurial endeavor, and we talk about that quite a bit, which is, you just have to focus on the inputs, not the outcomes. Because you no matter what you do, you can't control the outcome. And all you can do is control how much you put in and just have faith and that it'll all work out, and just belief in
what you're doing.
Belief in what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Matt, something else you mentioned in our pre-call was that your entire business model is built around having conversations. So whether it's with investors, partners, or your team, Can you talk about why conversations are so critical in your industry?
I think a big reason is because what we're doing is different, right? This is not how people invest in commercial real estate up until this date. And so when you do something different, people want to hear from the person who invented it, and they want to know that we know what we're talking about. They want to know that we've thought about all the different angles. They want to know that this isn't a scam, right? And I think that's a lot different than maybe a regular consumer product where, if it looks cool and it's the right price, it fits, right? And people will buy it, they'll try it. But in a financial product, there's a huge amount of trust that needs to be established between the management company and the investors. And so developing that trust is really just one conversation at a time. And it's kind of a golden age for this scenario because podcasting has become such a force within the digital media landscape. So this gives us the ability to have conversations directly with our potential investors through podcasts. And we want people to hear us talk. We want people to hear that we're a family company, right? We're self-funded. We have not taken any big institutional capital because if we did, we would have capital pressures that would be pressuring us to make decisions that perhaps are not necessarily in alignment with our long-term value creation objective that we're trying to deliver to our investors. So we're trying to tell people what we're doing, why we're doing it, establish that trust so that people can feel comfortable coming on board and investing with us.
Yeah, I can understand that. And you're right, like podcasting, they work wonders for building trust and boosting visibility, both of which you're wanting to do.
Absolutely.
How do you approach conversations then with potential investors in order to build that trust? What do you do?
I think it's really just letting them drive the conversation, right? And it's about establishing understanding because what we're doing is different, right? So most people, they try to find frameworks in their mind to benchmark off of. And so you have to find the framework that works for them and then help them adjust that framework to fit what you're doing. Yeah. So usually we start out with discussing REITs because most people understand what a REIT is. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
I'm not. Feel free to explain that.
Okay, so a REIT is a publicly available commercial real estate investment product.
Okay.
And there are hundreds, potentially thousands of different REITs that are publicly traded. The big difference between what we're doing and what a REIT does is a REIT will distribute 90% of the income that is generated from the properties they invest in, right? So it's an income producing investment product. So if you invest $1,000, right, you will get a return on that $1,000 on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis from the REIT. Now, what we're doing is we're keeping all the money in the fund and we're reinvesting it into more assets. So that allows us to differentiate ourselves from REITs because REITs are focused on giving distributions and we are focused on growing the portfolio. So your investment of $1,000, instead of receiving $50 or $100 once a year or across 12 months, we're reinvesting that into more assets. So the value of your $1,000 grows over time. And ultimately it creates a compounding effect that compounding starts out very slowly, but over long periods of time, it delivers explosive growth. It's a tremendously boring investment strategy, but it's super powerful over long periods of time. So having these conversations with people is about establishing what they understand and then re-navigating that into what we do. And everybody's level of understanding is totally different. And some people only understand, I buy a house and I rent it to people. And, how does this relate to that? And it's a process of trying to understand what they understand and teach them a little bit in a way that's not condescending or, not trying to throw a bunch of jargon at them so that I sound smart. I'm not trying to sound smart. I'm trying to show you that I know what I'm talking about, but also educate you on what I'm doing, inspire the belief that it's a good idea. Because I think it's an amazing idea, but I want you to come to that conclusion on your own. I don't want you to just hear me say it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you said about establishing an understanding, because that's so important, isn't it, as a building block for trust. Also, I like how you allow them to explore rather than talking at them. So where they've got the questions, you kind of let them guide the conversation in many ways so that they have a full understanding of what it is that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And the problem is I've explained this in so many different ways that a lot of times people just like, oh yeah, I get it. But they don't really fully understand what I'm talking about. And so it's important to ask questions, and help them get to the point of true understanding.
No, I like that. Do you remember a particular conversation that helped you, say, secure your first major investment or anything like that?
Maybe not secure my first investment, but my other brother he's a wonderful debater, and he's very hard to convince of anything he doesn't truly believe in, right? If he thinks it's a bad idea, he'll let you know. So convincing him that this was a good idea was a long process. I remember one time I think it was after having a long conversation and asking him to look at our newest website, I said, let me know, tear it apart, give me your feedback. And he came back and was like, I like it. I think it actually works. It's clear. Yeah. It makes sense. And so, I remember having that conversation where I was surprised that he didn't have any real feedback, which is unique. Yeah. So that one stands out, but we really haven't really launched full scale yet. So we have not attracted any major investors within the fund yet. That's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 weeks, where we're fully bringing people into the sales funnel and trying to get them to engage with us.
Perfect. Sorry, I jumped the gun there for you. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine.
Matt, one of the things that I was really looking forward to about recording this podcast with you is because our conversations and how they impact us is not just when it comes to our businesses. We're more than that. So I know from when we were talking in the pre-call, I know that you shared about a conversation that affected your personal life as well. And it was a great story about how conversations play a big role in relationships. So can you tell us a little bit about how that worked with your relationship with your wife?
Yeah. So me and my wife, we met on a dating app. And neither of us had really explored the apps too much or had a lot of dates on the apps or really engaged very much. But we just kind of connected. We hit it off, a little banter on the texting, and then she just called me one day. And this was only 3 or 4 days after sending a handful of texts, and we chatted for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. It was a quick conversation, and then we proceeded to talk on the phone every day for over a month before we had actually met in person. And the reason was because I used to travel for work, and I was only supposed to be gone for 2 or 3 weeks, but it turned into a 6-week trip. We had connected very early on in that trip, and so we were getting to know each other from a distance. So we started having these conversations about everything and nothing. And at one point we were talking for 2 hours every night after work. I'm in my hotel room and we're just kind of chatting about, like I said, everything and nothing for about a month before we had ever met in person. Long story short, we are married. We have 2 kids. She's the love of my life. And And I really do believe that those conversations were the foundation of our relationship. The fact that we didn't meet in person, I think, was actually super beneficial because it gave us the opportunity to really get to know each other before we had ever met in person. I think that kind of short circuits the traditional dating app scenario where it's just like, let's go and let's meet and let's see if we hit it off. It's like there's so much more to a relationship than just seeing if you guys hit it off that first time. There's a lot of pressure, or maybe not enough pressure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love what you said about those conversations were the foundation of your relationship. I'd love to know more. Like, what was it about those that made it so impactful?
I think it's just really getting to know somebody, right? Getting to know where they came from, how they grew up, what their goals are, what their dreams are, getting to understand, what makes them happy, what makes them laugh, being able to tell them what you dream about and seeing how they react. Also, establishing values, right? There's a lot to it. And, I think a lot about this now that I have kids, which is it's really hard to really get to know people in our modern life. You grow up, you go to college, you get a job, you move to a new city, right? Maybe that city doesn't work out. You move to a new city, you start over again. Well, that's a really new phenomenon in the human experience, right? Traditionally, people, they didn't really travel too far away from their home. Then the people that they ended up marrying were the people that they grew up with, the people that they knew 15 years, 10, 15 years, right? Having that level of connection and understanding and really getting through a large amount of the get to know you phase added to the blossoming of our relationship. So there's so much to talk about when you get to know somebody. It's hard to do it on a blind date over drinks, right? That's it. It never worked for me. So I feel really, kind of blessed that we had that opportunity. It felt like a curse at the time, actually, because my wife likes to joke she thought I had another family because I was gone. She's like, "Are you coming back?" I said, "I don't know. We'll see. I got extended another week. week." And so after a few weeks of that, she was starting to doubt my my legitimacy, how about you say.
No, that's very cool. I love that. And also, it's just as I'm listening to you talk, you were saying about in those conversations, you get to share values and you build that trust. And it's similar to what you had with your dad. Like the shared values were already there. That trust was already there. But to be able to have these kind of conversations that are so impactful because you're willing to go so far below the surface. Yeah,
absolutely. And then the other thing is, I don't think that we were necessarily going into these conversations with the intent of going that far below the surface. But when you talk to someone 2 hours a day for a month straight, you kind of run out of like fluffy, easy stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
Right? So just putting in that time, and again, not deliberately, but just because we were really excited to talk to each other.
Yeah.
There were days where we had some serious conversations, and I always felt great doing it. I really wanted to talk to her every day, but we had some serious conversations about how we grew up, about, values, about things that were happening in the world at the time. It took time to get beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And so giving it that time was really what we needed. You run out of the fluffy stuff to talk about, and pretty soon you're either digging deep or you're moving on. And so we dug deep, and we both liked what we saw.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. How would you say that experience with your wife then has it shaped the way you approach communication in other areas of your life?
I think it's really taught me that a single conversation isn't really going to do much, right? You have to go into anything with an understanding that it's not as simple as just having one conversation. So I think about that a lot with my son. And, we're teaching him that he can't push or hit his little sister, who's an infant who's learning how to crawl and stand, and she pulls up on everything, including him. And, so we have to explain to him over and over and over, because, toddlers, they hear you, but they don't necessarily process everything that you say.
Yeah.
They process actually a very small amount of things that you say. And it's having the patience to have those conversations over and over and over again. And not getting frustrated that he's not getting it. Or, speaking to a professor where I went to business school, trying to explain to him why I think this is such a great idea. He's not getting it. It's like, well, okay, I have to have another conversation. We have to really dig into this over and over and over again. And it also helps you or me get better at communicating, right? Okay, so somebody's not really picking up what I'm saying. Okay, well, let's have this conversation again. Let's try again. Let's just keep doing it. And the hardest part is convincing the other person to keep listening.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Like, it's coming alongside them and knowing what it is they need to hear and how they need to hear it, isn't it?
Yeah. And also staying engaged, right? Because they don't want to hear the same thing over and over again, because who wants to do that? So just being patient and always trying to get better, right? You can always communicate more effectively, but just never giving up, being relentless, being disciplined to keep going at it, even when things are slow or not going your way or anything like that. I would say that experience really shaped that belief that things take time, and you have to put in the time. Otherwise, it's surface level. To get deep, you really have to put in the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the things I feel like what's coming through with in this conversation with you is that you're really passionate about the idea that small, consistent conversations over time lead to growth, whether that's in your business, whether that's in your relationships. So I'm wondering, could you unpack that idea a little bit more?
Sure. Like a side interest of mine is politics, right? And that's a very taboo topic. Everybody has their opinions about social issues, financial issues, but we don't really talk about them because we're afraid of offending people or afraid of being offended. But I found that having conversations about different political issues is actually really beneficial to, number one, your relationships, but also to your ideas. Because if somebody can poke a big hole in one of your closely held opinions, well, maybe that makes you rethink, or maybe it helps you solidify your position more, right? Or it helps you shore up the weakness of your argument. So I think having those consistent conversations over very, very long periods of time help your argument become stronger, help you really evaluate what your opinions are, or maybe rethink positions. So small, consistent conversations are beyond just a tool to maybe succeed in business or build strong relationships. I mean, it's a way to examine yourself, right? It's a way for you to put your ideas to the test. And if they can't weather the storm, then you have to look inside. And that's hard. That's hard. Not a lot of fun at all. To say, hey, I believe this. And somebody's like, have you thought about that? And you're like, no. Uh-oh. Like, that's not good. It puts you in a vulnerable state. How about that? Right? Where you are expressing your opinions in such a way that you are putting them up into the market of ideas, and you have to see what comes back. And that's that can be scary. And it is scary. I don't like doing it, but I try to do it as often as I can, because it ultimately makes you stronger and it makes your arguments better. And sometimes it causes you to change your mind. And that's a good thing. I think people associate their identity with their ideas. I didn't come up with that. I'm just parroting it, but I think I like it. I like that because I used to do that. But the more often you can disassociate your identity with your ideas and put your ideas to the test and not be crushed when your idea is crushed is really valuable for self-growth and for perseverance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point. I love what you've said, because you're right. Self-awareness, or having that self-awareness, can be painful at times.
Yeah. To say the least. It's brutal. It can be really, really hard. And having a good support system, like when some of those core ideas that are really kind of at the core of who you are come crashing down, or maybe just tumble a little bit, it can be really valuable to have that support system of people that are like, hey, I love you no matter what. And it helps you pick yourself up and put the pieces back together and re-examine what your life philosophy is all about, or what's really important to you. And I think that that's good. I think it's good to break those weak pieces down and build them back up stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love what you've said. Thank you. Matt, this has been great. I really appreciate your you being so candid, and your thought. You're very thoughtful. You're very humble in the way you talk and the way you think. I love that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated the conversation.
Well, thanks so much. And before we wrap up, though, Matt, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about REI Capital Growth?
Yeah, so come to reicapitalgrowth.com. That's where everything is located. All of our social media is on there as well. So it's just reicapitalgrowth.com, and come take a look at what we've done and let us know what you think.
For those tuning in, you'll find all the links and details in the description. And so that's it for today's episode. Matt, thanks again for your time, your wisdom. It's really been fun. It's been great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe for more conversations that open doors, create opportunities, and shape the way we think. From Matt and from me, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.